and I'll admit all. Lovely. Let me just turn that. So hopefully everybody's in. Good. You can see SPIROS. Right, so hi everybody, welcome back. I can see a large version of Peter on my screen. So there's more and more people joining us as we speak. I'm just going to try and let everybody in as much as I can. And today I'll get the slides up, but we're going to be talking about commercialism in fashion illustration and fashion arts. I guess our journeys as illustrators, as creatives in the fashion sort of commercial world, whether we've sold ourselves to the devil or not, we'll discuss this. There'll be many topics to be discussed tonight. So I'm just going to go across to these slides, and I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully you can all see in a minute. Let me just share my screen. So our talk tonight is on commercialism, and we're lucky to have tonight Peter and SPIROS. I guess going commercial in the arts and working with the best and building relationships. So these are sorts of topics we'll be going through tonight, having a discussion. And also in the chat, if you've got any questions for us or for any of the team or anybody, put it up in the chat and we'll hopefully come across them more towards the end. Artist Peter Turner and SPIROS, and I guess we'll get to it quite quickly. So with regards to Peter, let me just try and get the whole screen up, see if I can show my whole screen, because I want to see your lovely faces. Here we go. I can see Peter now. I feel happier. So just with regards to Peter's work, I interviewed Peter probably near the beginning of starting up Fida. And as Peter knows, and most people, with regards to Fida, was literally, you know, we were all working as commercial illustrators, and we really want to sort of not feel isolated. COVID kind of elevated the isolation a little bit. And it also meant that it was a nice opportunity through Zoom, which came from nowhere, to give us an opportunity to discuss. And I interviewed Peter, and we went through, I spoke about his work, and we had a good talk. And then I kind of came across Peter again through other people, through David Bamber, who I worked with at Tom Ford. He recommended Peter. So I was like, look, this Peter keeps turning up, as if we're with the same people. So it was quite interesting to finally sort of get you here. And I guess what has been fascinating to me the most recently is I've seen a lot of the stuff you've been doing for the Fashion Illustration Gallery.
Yes.
And I guess the questioning you're doing, I feel there's a sort of, the images I put up here is this sort of interplay of a concept mixed with a fashion object. And I guess a good start is these images in particular, because these are new, and I've looked through the sort of history of your work, and I feel this to me is a little bit of a revelation for your work. And I don't know, you tell me, Peter, what you think.
Well, I started as an in-house illustrator, which is quite a rare job now, and that was with Galliano at Dior. And so for about the 8 years while I was there, I was working purely as an illustrator. And then since then, I've been working as a women's wear fashion designer for various fashion houses and doing illustration as a side project, but very much designing by drawing. And so these fashion illustration gallery pieces, we're presented a theme for each auction. And the theme of these ones that you have up on the screen right now was still life. So I think a really important part for me was challenging the theme each time. And instead of doing something classical, kind of breaking down the elements of what a still life is and could be. And I was trying to do these ironic interplays between highbrow and lowbrow, like mixing in the Cartier Panther ring with nuts and bolts to kind of contrast and compare. And yeah, these auctions through the Fashion Illustration Gallery have been my first opportunity really to work independently as my own artist, as opposed to always producing work kind of anonymously for these big fashion houses. So that's kind of what these pieces were about.
And I guess, for me, firstly, they were super successful visually. And then I thought, wow, there's a real moment here. And I guess they look a little bit more labor intensive. So you've worked on them a lot more. And there's a real, I don't know, the McQueen boot. And I don't know, I feel that this is kind of a turning point of going from sort of commercial art and mixing commercial art to art. You've got these artists, Tom Wieselman, and all these sort of hyper-realist artists who use, like you were saying, the mixing of the lowbrow, the highbrow. And I think, I don't know if you're going to progress with these pieces. I think because they're fantastic.
Well, yeah, you're exactly right. I was looking at Chuck Close and also Jeff Koons's hyper-realism. Yeah. And because again, I didn't really want to do something that looked whimsical. I wanted to almost do something that had an element of kitsch to it. Yeah. Like really high gloss, really high shine, really getting in the textures and everything. And so in a way, I treat these projects a bit like school. Like each time I want to try a different technique. Like I'd love to do a series of drawings that are actually embroideries, trying different things each time, because the artists that I really respect, I mean, Picasso ultimately just changed his style every few years and kept everyone guessing and was really a chameleon on the art scene. And I've always just really admired that. And just as soon as you've kind of got one thing down, trying to apply it to a completely different element is kind of exciting.
And because I'm going to show another page here, but I'm just going to see if we can move forward. But the next page was some examples of what you kind of moved it, like some earlier ones, and then some more later ones. And then these more finalized ones, the two portraits, which you've done recently. And you can see, like, there's so many different artists now coming in. You're kind of mixing and playing. And I think, well, Picasso is an illustrator. So from his sort of playfulness of an illustrator's mind. And I think this is what we've been talking about in this is our 6th talk. And we've been talking about how illustrators are very versatile, very chameleon, and we jump around, even though agents hate that because they want you to have a technique or a style that they can sell, where you're probably their worst nightmare at the moment, even though they don't realize you're creating a whole body of work every time that creates loads of opportunities. They're like, oh no, we just need consistency of that style. And it kind of puts you in a dead end.
I think, well, William Ling, the owner of the gallery, is very, very supportive. And if he feels that way, he hasn't let me know, which I appreciate. But I think that you're probably right. And I think one element is that these are commercial pieces, but it does help that I don't rely on them commercially. Like the starting prices of these pieces are £75, so I could definitely not make a living selling these through auction. Yeah. So considering I don't rely on them, I kind of do feel freedom to shift around a bit. Whereas if I had one really successful auction and it was like a really simple line drawing and I really needed to make money from it, I probably would return to that style again and again and maybe develop that one way of thinking. But I guess I'm a bit schizophrenic in the way that I dot around, but I guess I get bored very easily.
Yeah, because like for me, every time I'm looking, I'm like, oh, these are great, and I can see maybe Van Gogh in the sort of the marks that are quite swirly, and then you go for another artist and you can feel there could be a bit of Rothko coloring, there's so much in there. And you're like, oh, right. It's like a vocabulary of different imagery. You're talking about Chuck Close. And I think that's great to hear, because a lot of sort of illustrators, or, I was lecturing today and they're referencing too much of fashion on fashion. And I
Mm.
say, don't reference fashion. That's sort of a no-go zone. Is don't
Yeah.
reference the field that you're in. You know, look beyond and outside it. And I think from a commercial aspect is you want to make money, but you're thriving on making great art. That's your energy comes from your creativity.
Well, if I made something that I knew was going to sell and I didn't like it, and then it didn't sell, I would really feel like empty. Whereas if I make a drawing that I love and then it doesn't sell, I still kind of feel like it's an accomplishment. Like I don't feel too devastated by that. It's a bit of a bruise to my ego, but like I don't feel destroyed by not selling those pieces because I'm like, oh, I'll have them back. That's fine.
Yeah, it was a strange one, the £75 thing. I think a lot, I was talking to David Downton about it, and it kind of, you've made it seem much nicer to me now, which is you don't feel too precious about it. You're like, it gives me an opportunity to make something. If it sells, it sells. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's an opportunity to be playful. And it's created a whole new sort of way of doing different. And you've seen it as a sort of opportunity to create a new body of work every auction. I'm seeing a new sort of style come through. And then you could go, I could develop that style. I could develop that style. That's quite nice. And I'm waiting, I guess, for little bits of little triggers. If something bites, I think that's quite an important part to being a sort of a commercial artist, is putting like fish out there and see if it gets caught. And I think that's similar to what I see with what you're doing here. I don't know, what's the feedback been on the different work? Which work's been more appealing?
Well, it's really interesting because since this talk is about commercialism as well, it's really, really interesting seeing what sells. It's not always my favorite pieces. Sometimes I'm genuinely surprised at the most popular pieces. Sometimes they race away and others are less popular. And that's been an education as well, because always having worked for other design houses, I've always been working under instruction, like, as a tool in the arsenal of design development. So it's kind of a joint effort when something is successful. Whereas when one of these pieces does well, you feel self-satisfaction, and it is interesting what sells. Like it's generally a lot of color, a bit of movement. But then looking at some of the other artists, sometimes it's very minimal things that sell, something that's very graceful and elegant. And then you begin to get into the mindset of like, oh, well, people are putting these on their walls. It's kind of like a piece of interior design. Like people may be matching these sketches to other things they have in their house. And I don't think it's too healthy to go down that rabbit hole, but I think you have to be conscious of the fact that people want to buy something in this category, something that's beautiful. So trying to make sure that it's not too offensive, provocative, that it does have an element of beauty and elegance about it.
Yeah, no, and it's a hard, because you don't want to be decorative and seen as decoration. You want to be seen as doing something, I guess, tapping into your qualities of being a good artist and a good creative. And it is a fine line between something that's decoration and something that has the finesse of good art. I think that's the hardest part of, I guess, the word illustrator is, are some of the illustrators decorative? Are some of the illustrators doing something that's quite sophisticated? It's getting that fine balance, and I think that's quite a tough one. Anyway, we're going to move on to Spiros, because I can see him smiling away there, and then we'll come back and we've got lots of questions. So I'm just going to introduce Spiros. So Spiros has been on my radar for probably 15 years. So sounds quite sad or cynical.
Wow.
But our names have cropped up bits and bobs, and we were meant to either meet in London, and then you'd move to New York, and various friends had said, oh, you've got to speak to each other. And
right.
I guess with illustrators, we're like these fly-by-night people. We're all over the place, jumping around, and we're working, and we're working live, or you have a commission, so that takes over your life for a month, so you don't have time to socialize or have fun. It's quite a serious thing at the end of the day as well. And I guess with your work, when I guess early work, you've shifted quite a lot, and you've kind of had this sort of wave going through your work, and appealed so well to the commercial world. You know, I think Peter has sort of tapped into the more sort of craft drawing, where you're what I'd call a super commercialized. And
I'll take it. By the way, I also like to say that I really enjoyed hearing both this first segment, because I thought what Peter was saying was very refreshing in terms of shifting and changing and kind of going through different phases with your style and with your, you know, experimentation. So that was refreshing to hear, because usually you don't hear that. Usually you hear kind of one take of something, like this is how I do something and that's forever. So it was interesting to hear a different take. But back to what you were saying, yes, I've had that too myself a lot. So basically when I started working as an illustrator, which is closer to the image on the right, my right.
Yeah.
It was a very almost different portfolio from what the portfolio would be like, you know, in 2021. And also going back to your comment regarding the agent, yes, my first agent, for example, in New York, got me with a very different portfolio than what she has now. So you need to maybe sometimes find the right pair that you can allows you also to either adopt or evolve as an artist, because sometimes it is about having that freedom where you can go somewhere that, you know, it's not where you started, and it just changes in a way that, like the way you are, like the person. So yeah.
And I guess from me seeing your work and seeing, you know, I love to see your work on garments. You know, the pleated dress was beautiful, and I just feel, you know, your work is very multifunctional, and it can be seen on packaging, it can be seen on advertising campaigns, on billboards. It's very malleable for the commercial world, and I think that's what, I guess, with regards to, it's quite nice to have the two of you, because Peter has gone down a little bit of a journey that I've working for other companies and being like a hidden gem, where you're kind of been out there in the forefront, big campaigns, big work. And I've seen your work many, many, many times. And it's just interesting to see sort of the journey that, and the refinement. And I think a lot of people won't realize how your work has been refined. But also, if I zoomed into some of your work, are you using Procreate as well on the iPad? Or
I haven't. I've been using Photoshop only for probably 8 years, and I've just moved this past year to almost being 90% only physical work.
Wow.
So it made that. It was a pandemic phase of I'm kind of moving into a different field that I don't have to touch a screen kind of anymore, which is something I've never done in 10 years that I've been doing this. So it was kind of, that's another step. So that's another phase, I guess.
Another problem for the agents, which is good. We want to keep
hopefully, yes,
stressed out. And I put a bit of work on here, the Washington Post and some of the magazine work and some of the commercial pieces. And you know, when I saw some of your portraits, I was thinking of someone like Alex Katz, and he kind of came to mind. And I can kind of see who you're sort of riffing off with regards to the art world, which, you know, we're learning from our masters. And I think it's not a bad thing to be looking around like a voyeur, and they'll be doing the same off you. They'll be going, well, if I take this out and smooth that bit out, and you'll see this, you know, you're kind of like a magpie going around picking pieces up and going, that's quite nice, I have a bit of that, and I'll work with this, and I'll apply it to my well, we don't want to say style, but my workflow, as we might want to call it. But I guess for you, you know, I don't know how, with regards to your day, how does your day function?
Well, I mean, what you were describing, I would call it the Frankenstein process. So it's a little bit of kind of, you take a leg, you take an eye, you take a head, and not figuratively, but more in terms of, where all the elements and all the references come from. And your question, how my day goes. My day goes, I like to draft things from the beginning of my day. So I like my day to go into drafting first thing, whatever it is I'm drafting, and kind of mapping things out of where I have to go. And then I just do more kind of menial admin necessary steps for being, from being a full-time illustrator. So, but I find some of this stuff being very exhausting and very kind of draining mind-wise. So I'm trying to use the boost and the good time of the day for the work, and then the rest of that for the other stuff.
And I know that the balance of anything, and I think because I remember when I got married, I got a commission in the night before I was going to get married, and I had to go back to my house to get the scanner to work till like 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right,
and
it's a hustle.
I guess that's commercial work, and I think it was a job for Sainsbury's or something, designing a typeface. And the different jobs you get, the fun ones. And then I think when I got married, and then when I got on the honeymoon, they were like, "Oh, can you make changes?" And I'm on my honeymoon. So it just shows you the life of sort of a commercial artist. It never stops, even if you're going to get married, or if you're going to die. I'm sure they'll ring you up in the grave to pull you out to finish off.
Someone's going to get those calls.
But it is, I guess, a very hard playing field. And I don't know, when I first started, the feedback I'd get is, "Oh, can you change this? Can you, make these different?" And they kind of try to manipulate what you do to what they want. And that for me, that became the biggest frustration of being sort of in the commercial market, is them really changing your style or your way of working to what they really want. And I don't know if that happens much for you, or
it has happened, and I think it happens inevitably whenever you work with clients in some formal way. But through time and through experience, I think I've kind of gathered as much information in terms of how to turn this in my favor, meaning I'm trying from the beginning to understand what it is they came for, meaning because usually clients come from something they've already seen of your work. So, and it could be something you've done 5 years ago, it could be something you just did, could be something that it floats on the internet at this point. So for me, it's a matter of kind of understanding why are they here, meaning what's their vision. Is it a vision in terms of, we love your aesthetic, we love the overall body of work, and we want to give you kind of a free reign? Or is it kind of, we love that portrait and we want tens of them? So that, I think, eliminates a little bit of kind of, because the moment I get that response, I can see where pretty much they're standing and how open or creative they would like to be. And then kind of assessing the risk, let's say, of how many changes they would like to have or how much they want things to adopt. It kind of takes on from there. But I think kind of figuring out where you stand with the client from the beginning can help you eliminate a lot of the much more dreadful steps that could come later.
And I guess an interesting thing is has there been moments when enough is enough and the client is just terrible, and you just say, I can't do this anymore? You're going to have to.
Only one job, to be honest. In this 10 years I've been working, there's only been one job where it was both me, my agent, and the producer that was involved, because it was a client, third-party client, that we decided that this is not going to work, because nobody had ever encountered such difficulty. And I think that, to me, said that was an exception, meaning usually you don't get, I think, clients that would be that way, too difficult to the point where it's like enough is enough. Because I think there's always, they come because they love your work, and they come because they love what the artist does. So there is already some sort of communication, some sort of relationship, let's say, right? So it's not a cold call at the door of like, here I am, would you like to hire me? So I think that helps always. But there are some times, because you get a lot of different heads involved and a lot of different opinions involved, that something could not work out. And sometimes the client could not have maybe a clear vision of what they wanted. But I think that this is kind of an exception. It's not usually a point you get to a point where you really cannot work with each other anymore.
Because I'm just trying to think from a so obviously you're in New York, so most of my work now is probably US based, and my experience of American clients to British clients, and I guess Peter will be laughing about this as well, is in Britain, people are much more aggressive with what they want and how they want it, where I find America, they're just really nice. They're very grateful. They love what we do, and they appreciate illustration as a practice. That's my personal experience in 20 years of doing it. Is, if I work with an American client, they're like, fantastic, and they'll really try and work with you. And then if you work in the UK, it's get it done. You're too expensive. Get that price down. And it's like you're a builder. And the experience is terrible. And I know lots of artists like Patrick Vell, who's a friend of mine as well. He's moved to the US, and people are moving there because illustration is appreciated in a different format.
I think in what you said about being understood and being a practice that has a very vast understanding in the industry in terms of, not in every way, but they do it's an industry that people and brands and corporations understand into a larger way, maybe perhaps. And that's why I think sometimes the language and the communication part of the actual commission or the project can be a little easier or smoother. So yeah, I would agree with you on this. And
I guess I'm going to call Peter back in because I've seen his mic's off. But with regards to you, Peter, because I've got a few different little questions here, and if anyone's got questions, if you can put them up in the chat, I hopefully can find the chat. Let me just see if there's. So we've got these sort of Q&A. Let me see if there's anyone's put anything in our chat, because usually we have a few things. We got one. Hi. we've got hi. So hi everybody. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw in a question. The biggest question I'm getting at the moment is pricing, and that seems to be you've got agents, and your agents have a rough guide price. Is the price based on you, or is the price based on the client? And that runs to Peter, and then it will be to you, Spiros, as well, with regard to pricing things up.
In my experience, I tend to give a suggestion of a day rate, how many days I think the work will take. And then often that's met with a slight scoff or a slight retraction. And so you have to kind of rework that maybe to the specific project and give a little bit of a discount or like some kind of wangling to make sure that the client feels that they're getting a good deal.
Yeah, and for you, Spiros, because I'm sure you've got
I think what Peter described is definitely a process I use as well. I think what happens sometimes is that there are some fields that have specific rates or specific kind of ranges that they would go in terms, for example, editorials or newspapers or covers, or so there are some numbers that are, especially in the States, that are kind of fixed more or less. There's always room to go higher and lower, but they're kind of, the industry knows them, so they kind of float around some numbers. And then for larger projects or for larger commissions or campaigns, then you just have a lot of variance in terms of your price as an artist, in terms of how long it will take you and how many times, days, and also then you get the usage and the rights and the anything that's added on. So there's a few things that I think vary in terms of what's the pricing like. But I think I'm glad you're getting this question, because I do think for all of us, it's important for new illustrators or illustrators working in the industry to know this answers and know how these things work, because eventually it affects everyone. And we're all operating kind of in the same pool, meaning, you know, it's a niche industry, but we kind of all working with each other and with the same brands and with the same corporation. So it helps to know where we stand price-wise, kind of overall.
Yeah, and if I can just say as well, Spiros, I don't know if you have this still, but because illustration and art is a pastime that's very enjoyable, and we're very lucky to be making money from something that we love doing, I still get approached very often by people thinking that they're doing me a favor by giving me a chance to draw, and that I'll do it for free, and that it should be a pleasure. And
I have this lovely cat, Peter. I would love a portrait. Yeah, yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Oh, my dog's getting married, and you should see.
Of course.
You know.
Yes. Well, which is, you know, yeah, I agree with you. And I think, yes, I think inevitably comes with the trait, kind of comes with it. But I do think it's also important. And I think maybe that comes because there is a lot of pastime illustration. There's a lot of illustration that is being done because it's enjoyable, and that's totally fine. And, you know, not every hobby needs to take a much more, for example, you know, commercial life kind of job like way. And that's totally fine. But I think professionals, and you know it, and I know it, and Patrick knows it, it's just a different approach of things, because it does, you know, involve time, it involves other people, it involves, you know, people that we work with. So it's a kind of larger equation here.
Yeah, and someone's just put up a question about amendments. So with regards to making amendments and changes and charging for that, like with my agent, it's usually 2 rounds of changes. Like we'll do probably 1 major changes if there's major ones at the beginning, and then probably 1 sort of final round, and then there'll be a charge. I don't know if it's different for you, Peter.
Yes, I think when it's a really important discussion to have at the beginning of taking on a project, how many amendments there are going to be, and to try and include that in the price that you're offering. And in my experience, it does tend to be a few more rounds of changes than are initially suggested by the client. So it's just important when you're saying your price to include those extra changes in. So I generally try to include it in the overall package rather than charge for those extra changes after the fact.
Yeah, and for you, Spiros,
yeah, I agree. I think kind of having a little bit of, and I think having the experience of kind of all of us been kind of working in a different way. And I can imagine, for example, you know, Peter, if you're doing something, you know, in watercolor, if you're doing something by hand, doing a major change at a later stage, it's basically starting from scratch, because some, I imagine, things cannot be amended. So it also, I think you have, the artist, I think, has to kind of vary their what medium they're using. I know there's a lot of artists that work, for example, with oils or with vertical. So I think that's, for example, something that should either have a very strict limit or should be very straightforward from the beginning. I also like to kind of have a package included, meaning we do 2 rounds, and then the third one, depending if it's a minor or not, it has a charge or not. But also I think what also is there, it's not necessarily about, you know, getting more money out of the client or charging more, but it's also about kind of putting a little bit of a stop to the process. Meaning, because some clients would just, you know, somebody else would jump in, a director that was on holiday would come in the last minute and be like, oh, you know, why don't we make this hat blue now? So, you know, and then I think just having these little holders there, it just stops also the process from being never ending. It's not necessarily for us, for the illustrators to get more out of the commission. It's about also the process kind of stopping.
And I find the change is so difficult with changes, and I think, like, depending on your style and technique, if you're a person who draws by hand quite a lot, the only problem with the changes is if you're quite a spontaneous artist and you draw and you feel that you've captured the essence in the drawing, and then they want to change it or art direct it so much that it becomes over art directed and almost destroys the artistic part of it. And that's the hardest part of being an illustrator or a creative, is listening to your guide, and your guide could be a bad guide who's overkilling. Like I've had people that wanted to produce stuff that's being printed or made small or a certain size, and you're thinking you've got 20 drawings on an A5 object. How is anyone going to see that from a artistic? So they're looking at it on a screen, and you're thinking, do you know what this is going to look like printed out? And I think that comes across to me quite a lot, is they want more for their money, so they're like, oh, can we fit this in? And these are for ads as well. And it's like, well, I it's almost, and this was a British client, so they wanted every dime out of me for every area. It was like they extrapolated or broke down the whole job for every little piece, so they got every bit, like as if I was building a piece for their house. And I find I'm meeting quite a few clients like that want every element, and they want to get everything and then be able to break it apart to make more use of it. So they might say, if I was using Peter's, I'd say, okay, can you make Alexander McQueen's shoe on one layer, a crow here, another crow, another object, and we're going to make a GIF, and we're going to take that apart, and we're going to use the crow on one thing. It finds like companies are becoming more restrained and greedy with how they could use it, which isn't the worst thing. It's just how it's composed, and you're hoping for it to be composed on the page as a piece to use as well in like a lot of people I see with commercial work is they'll show one thing that goes to the client, and then they'll take it away, rejig it for their portfolio. And I don't know if that happens for you guys as well. You just go, well, that's for the client, let's just get the money, and then now, oh, this is how I'm going to show it for me. And I'm sure, Spiros, you're going to be doing
right. Yeah, I mean, it has happened. Well, sometimes you start, you love the job from the beginning, and you love what is happening, and you like where this project is heading. And like I said, I mean, the hat example was not out of my mind. It just happened sometimes that somebody would come in last minute, and it would just like, the idea is going really well, and somebody would come and kill it because it's just too many changes and too many things being added on. And then, yeah, I mean, I think that's the freedom of being the creator, that you can just go back and be like, you know what, I think this idea was great, but I'm going to show it how I thought it should have been presented. So, yeah.
And I guess what would be an interesting, which happens to all of us, is them sort of magical moments. I'm sure, Peter, you've had a good few, because I know if you've worked with David Bamber and Tom Ford, has there been a moment where you've been flown somewhere, paid way too much money, or have you had that experience?
Well, I have to say my first job, plenty of times with David Bamber at Dior, but I think the time when it hit me the most, and it's probably because it was my first job and I was young coming into the industry, was when I started working at Dior, because it felt like arriving at the Vatican, and I felt like Galliano was the Pope, and it just felt so overwhelming and intimidating. And he was really into the artistic, creative side of design and wanted me to sketch in fittings. He wanted the studio plastered with drawings. He wanted pure, unadulterated creativity. So, but I did have a sense at the time of like, oh, this is a golden experience, and I'm sure not all other houses are like this. So I have to really try and soak this in as much as possible in these first few experiences.
And I guess for you, Spiros, any super moments?
Oh, super moments. A few, yeah. I think it's sometimes when the work kind of takes a larger, almost life than when you thought it would be. And also, I've always loved the idea of kind of being a creator somewhere and then you creating these moments in different places, whether it's New York, whether it's Paris, whether it's London, and then the work lives there without you being even there. But I being in Paris and doing the Christmas windows of Printemps in 2017, I think that was great, because I was here in New York working for like 4 months, and then you just end up in Paris and your work is everywhere, and you're like, okay, so that's a different place, and I'm here and I'm looking at it. And so a few moments like that where basically you go somewhere else, you travel with the work, and I always love that, because it's kind of, it gives you the ultimate freedom of being wherever you like, with, you know, not necessarily in present, but so yeah.
But I guess this is the difference between work that's created digitally and seen on screens than when you go and see it real time and it's on a wall or on a billboard, or
right.
That's I guess they're the magic moments when you see large, you know, I did work for Selfridges and I remember seeing that, and you know, I was like taking my mum and dad, quick, come and have a look, I'm in Selfridges. And I guess these are all the magic moments that you kind of go through and you're like, wow,
right.
I'm in here, I'm in this magazine. And it's funny, like what Peter was saying earlier, that people kind of forget that you've worked for all these people, and then they might go, well, I'm doing you a favor. You're like, well, I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm not a student anymore. As if you're
right.
an everlasting student, desperate to do someone's dog or cat. It's funny that there's a lot of chances out there for illustrators, and I wonder how many phone calls Damien Hirst gets to do free work. It'd be interesting to see his feedback. I'm sure it'd be a rocket launcher in their backsides or something. But let's see if there's any more messages. Everyone's like, wow, it sounds great. Peter, you're a very lucky man.
Oh, I know it.
But I think we're doing quite well. So we've got another minute or so. But with regards to both of you, it's been great. And luckily I've managed to capture you both. It was quite good to get you to speak. And, you know, it's great that we're all in different places and able to have this discussion. And I think for you, Peter, it's been brilliant to see all the new work, and I'm hoping there'll be more. And if we get out of a sort of this, I don't know, coronavirus lockdown, whatever's going on, to have shows. I don't know if you've got any plans for shows, Peter.
I don't. I mean, I've spent the last 2 years working freelance. Like normally I do studio work, I do in-studio work. So now as we're coming out of Corona, I'm deciding whether I want to go back to studio employment or if I want to. But the dream is to continue doing illustration and continue doing in-house design work. So because I've really enjoyed it, it's just been a lot more of an isolating experience than normal freelance work is, I think, these last 2 years.
Yeah. And SPIROS, what's any new plans or any new things on the horizon that's coming up?
Yeah, I don't know. I think post-COVID found me a little bit of trying to do a little bit more editing and kind of how much, because sometimes, you know, a lot of these projects that can be great, especially if we're talking about commercialism, but they can take up a lot of your time. And that's positive because there is work, but also they can take up, you know, 1, 2, 3 months. And which kind of sometimes stops you from doing something that you really like to do. And I feel like that I'm in that process now where I feel like I'll take this year to kind of keep doing the work I'm doing, but I'm also want to produce a lot of more work that I always wanted to produce. So I think that's the next chapter.
Yeah, and I think in to round this all up, even though we are these commercial artists, we still like to create our own stuff and sit in our little rooms and away and test and experiment and upset our agents all the time. We're always talking about agents, but you know, I guess agents from a commercial point of view is an agent will try and get you, this is the money, it's a very difficult one. And I think if you can stay a little bit outside and tip in and dip out, I think like Peter's doing and what you're thinking about doing, SPIROS, it's hard because if jobs come in and they're well paid or if they're the right jobs, obviously you're going to take them. And I guess some of the things that I've come across recently is a lot of people saying no to jobs because of the company's ethics. I had a job recently for an American tobacco company, and it came across me, should I say no because it's cigarettes? But I don't smoke. So I don't know if you have anything about ethics in the commercial world, or if the check's big enough, you'll do it. Peter.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, I think I wouldn't work for Dolce & Gabbana because just of things they've said in the past, their kind of comments which have been perceived as racist and homophobic, and I wouldn't want to reward them with my work. Not to sound, that sounds awful, but like also like I wouldn't want to promote them, and yeah, so things like that. But I definitely wouldn't want to be associated with a tobacco company either. No,
and it is a hard moment because you're thinking, I've got to pay the bills. COVID stopped half of the workflow. What do you do? And even people talking about Google and Facebook and all of these sorts of places to work for. It's a really hard question. I don't know, have you turned down any jobs, Spiros, due to integrity?
I've turned down tobacco companies before. I think the tobacco has been an industry that's been coming and going with illustrators all the time, especially probably the last 15 years. And I think they get a lot of no's. I think it's kind of an area where it became great. I used to smoke for 10 years plus, so I'm in a weird gray area where I don't necessarily want to put my work on it, but I'm up to, if somebody wants to do it, they want to do it. I live in New York where somebody, the first month I was here, somebody stopped me in the street and said to me, "You're going to die from smoking." So people are very aggressive about where they stand with smoking, and it's fine. But I would just put the work in there. But other than that, I think, yeah, I would agree. I wouldn't work with somebody that has any sort of history with, homophobia or any kind of racism or any sort of, but you want to do a little bit of your work in terms of what is out there. Is it just a comment that came out, suddenly out of a random account, or is it some sort of systematic or a problem where it's actually substantial, like what Peter was describing, which I agree. So I think it's about doing. I think it's good to do your homework in terms of who you're working with, because at the end of the day, you're becoming a little bit part of that company or brand.
Yeah, and I think what's been quite interesting recently is there has been, the talk about Dolce & Gabbana, and I know Draw a Dot, who's another sort of online PR agency, promoting illustrators and discussing. And I know he's been trying to use illustrators to have a voice, which has been quite nice. We did a talk about illustrators and having a voice, and almost like being activists, which has been, for illustrators being commercial artists and becoming activists hasn't really been at the forefront, because you're thinking about making money, where here you're thinking about conveying your thoughts. And I think that's quite a nice sort of move across to make a point, which I think is good, and making the stance, because a lot of people are saying, well, I'm not going to work for Dolce & Gabbana. And I think it's only right that a lot of artists and illustrators do have a stance on this and a say, and almost illustrate about it as well, almost like the old cartoons that would be done by Raphael or whoever was doing the cartoons from the old and Renaissance times to contemporary. And I think these are it's an interesting time for illustrators. And I think fashion illustrators, creatives, we do have a voice, and the internet is the great place to kind of put that out there and get yourself heard through a new lens rather than a written lens. Because most of the illustrators, as we say, we're not very good at writing, so we draw. So, that's our written language. So I think there's been a good rise in that. So, you know, thanks, guys. It's been so lucky to have you, have your thoughts, and hopefully with both of you, Peter, with your new work, and we, you know, it's great to see what you're doing with FIG, and every auction there's another thing coming. I'm like, oh my God, there's another new look and feel, a new style. What next? And I'm talking to David in LA, and he's like, wow, look what Peter's doing. So we have a good chat. And it's great. It's great to see what you're doing. And I guess
that's so kind, Patrick. Thank you for having me.
yes, and Spiros, you know, I guess as illustrators and artists, we're fond of each other's work. And I guess everybody, we're all looking at each other and saying, wow, you lucky, this is great and it's fantastic. And you know, and you kind of, there's a bit of envy from people because we want to do better. And I think that's a nice thing. So thank you, and thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for having a chat with you both.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone watching and listening.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.